that, but
Okay. All right. No worries. Like I said, I'll pace it. I'll try to pace it as best I can.
Pace it.
pace it.
Well, it's like I'm not a fan of decks. Like it's kind of like that on PowerPoint, but at the same token, I want to make it informative, which I think this deck is. So
Well, I'm James. I cover the Bay Area territory in Northern California. I've been a Barracuda for 4 years. And yeah, looking forward to working with you guys, meeting you guys, and helping you any way I can. And
cool, small,
take a
intimate
seat.
crowd. This is nice. I mean, if you want to have a seat at the table, have a seat at the table. I mean, it's a little bit easier. But curiosity, different industries. Anybody from a unified school district? Okay. Anybody commercial?
What do you mean commercial?
Commercial.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. Anything from a SLED perspective? So government,
The county,
county.
public utility.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's good.
Is that the Jimmy?
Oh,
Dave
David.
Powell.
Oh, Jimmy with City of Fresno, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey.
I'm licensed from too.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, it's kind of interesting. Good to know. Good to know. How about you?
Affordable housing, nonprofit.
Guy in the back. Oh, you're KIS, so it's all good. Well, actually, it's good that you're here too, because this kind of involves you too. So, of course, again, thank you for attending. Thank you for KS for putting this all together. I think it's great. I'm just going to go ahead, but we'll keep the conversation, I think, hopefully open and lively. And again, any questions, feel free to pop on in. Well, do I hit you or do I hit the screen?
Yeah. Whoa. Whoa. Yeah.
Brian.
It's like Vanna. Put your hand out there.
Okay, is that me?
That should be you.
That's me. All right, cool. So, topic, which is kind of like that, listening on the rubric one, obviously talking about ransomware, but that's a very hot topic, in course. But I think one of the things that we offer towards the last part of the slide deck is actually the 5 steps that you can actually take. So this is really more about not necessarily anything Barracuda specific, which I kind of like. I mean, I can talk about our technology all the time, but I think this is more about information that you guys should be aware of. And again, this is where I think would be a great time where you can kind of a little bit of sharing on knowledge. So like, for example, obviously ransomware is a big issue. Who's read in the news? Give me somebody who was recently affected by this.
LA School District.
LA School District, right? That's why I brought up the whole concept of the school district. I was kind of curious. I haven't read up recently on what's going on, and the fact that I know they're working with the FBI on this whole thing, right? I don't know if they've released any other information other than they got caught with their pants down. They got hit with ransomware, and of course, you go to their website now, and they said half the site's actually still down because they're still recovering, which is an issue, right? So we know this threat is actually, well, it exists, absolutely. And we also know this because anybody knows the Verizon breach report, data report, right? Everyone reads this, looks at it, and they're going like, yeah, same thing over and over again. But one of the most interesting parts is ransomware continues to grow and continues to be a bigger and bigger problem, right? 13% growth, it's pretty significant, right? And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to stop. So this now gets back to you all in terms of what are you guys doing? I swear I have battery power here. Can you just move to the next? Did it pause? Did it die?
Got hit by ransomware.
All right.
Hit with
So, keys to the kingdom, right? How are people getting through? How is this ransomware occurring, right? Credentials, of course. How do people get credentials? Phishing. Pretty straightforward. And then obviously, they're taking other advantages too. Exploiting vulnerabilities in botnets. So really these kind of go together, but they kind of attack a different threat vector. We obviously understand where phishing is coming from. Either email, corporate, potentially personal. Now, the way I look at it is everyone's a target. It's just a matter of how they're going to get to you to get to your information. Because I may not be necessarily be the easiest target to get. Why? Because I'm in network securities and I get hounded with this all day. So it's like if I get compromised, it's like I look silly. So luckily I haven't fallen for any of our simulations that we do internally. With that being said, could they go potentially and attack my daughter, who's on Facebook, who's on Instagram, and then, infect her mobile device, phone, computer, whatever, and then she brings that into the network, my personal network, and that becomes a little bit of a different problem. I've done everything I can to protect myself. Somebody attacked my daughter instead, and I left that back door open, right? So you got to think about these things a little bit differently when it comes to where are your threat vectors, and understanding that you really need to take a look at everything. Now, this also starts to come into play when you start talking about cybersecurity, which is kind of an interesting topic on its own right, but we could kind of touch on it. Again, kind of going over the data from the Verizon breach report, the factors in terms of, well, what does it cost for an attacker to do their job versus what is the payout, right? And it's always kind of interesting, right? So you can see a lot of times when it comes to the simulated cost for gaining access to credentials, phishing, all that, not a lot of money. It's actually relatively dirt cheap. But what ends up happening is if you can get enough information, and if you can start utilizing that to create more informed attacks, there's this concept of scale that starts to come into play. And what's really interesting, skilled intrusion services. Now, this is really scary. Someone's decided that they're going to make a business out of pushing malware to people. And it's actually pretty damn successful. To the point in time where it's like, maybe I'm in the wrong business. But this is the trends that we're actually starting to see. Okay? So you need to be aware of, right? This is scary, right? But we've seen it. We've heard about it, right? We read it in the news. Was our election tampered with? Uptick in state-sponsored ransomware, right? I think recently in the news, smaller airports were actually hit with a denial of service attack. And they assume it was actually, right now, they're leading to think that it's actually state-sponsored from Russia, actually, right? But now you get to the point in time where there's, breaches that aren't really for ransomware, right? And there's just also this concept of what's called this triple extortion, which is rather interesting in itself, right? Continued exploitation, refinement of ransomware tactics that are already working. Well, you have to worry about this concept, this concept of ransomware as a service, because guess what? It's real. Go on the dark web. This is the hot thing that's out there. Why? Because this is actually what's making a lot of people money. May not necessarily be, it doesn't make sense for like the little hacker, the one onesie guy to attack. He's probably just doing it because he's annoyed or angry, whatever the case may be. But when you get a bunch of those people together working as a collective, and now they're going after bigger targets, this becomes a little bit of a different subject matter, right? It starts to evolve, right? I think, we hear about, again, we hear it in the news of what's going on. Utility companies, power companies, for example, anything to do with utilities, getting potentially attacked and breached, right? Hear about the news. Unified School District, again, heard about the news. Healthcare, right? What happens when someone gets a hold of their data, right? And this is where this fun thing of triple extortion. First, they threatened you and said, hey, we've locked up all your data. Pay us, we'll give it back to you. Maybe. You don't know. Second thing is, okay, if you tell them, yeah, I have backup everything, I don't need you, goodbye. And they say, well, what if we release that information to the public? How does that now affect you financially? Well, if you're healthcare, for example, that's going to be huge fines, right? So are you prepared for that? Do you have something in play to help, again, potentially deal with those fines? This is typically where cyber security insurance starts to come into play. But better yet, what we're seeing is now they're going to use that to hold it against you so they can attack your customers and your partners. So this concept of triple extortion starts to come into play. Maybe they got your data. Maybe they're going to hold it against you. Maybe they're going to use it to try to leverage money or whatever the case would be. Or if you say, nope, don't need you, I don't need to pay you, I've got it covered, I got backup, go away. Then they say, well, what happens if, again, release the data, or better yet, I'm going to look at that data and I'm going to find, potentially a way to attack your partners, your vendors, hit the supply chain instead. That becomes a bigger problem, right? And this is where it just starts to explode out. And again, sometimes SMB targets are better targets. Why? You may get to the smaller people first to get to the bigger fish. So if I can hit the supply chain to get to my bigger guy, this may be an easier target. And a lot of times, there's not a lot of investment here from a security perspective. So that is an easier target, right? The question is where do you fall in that supply chain aspect or overall, right? So there's this concept of what's called a multi-phase attack. And so we're going to take a kind of quickly look at what that means. So there's a website called MITRE that actually keeps track of all the different type of attacks. And, once you get in, how attackers moving about. This is actually I don't think they're a nonprofit. They actually are a for-profit company, but it's actually, they work with government agencies as well as, different industries, different verticals as well, to kind of help you understand what you may need to put into place in terms of what's there. One of the things they put out is they put out this matrix, which again, really kind of highlights all the different type of attacks, for example. We talk about initial access, drive-by compromise, exploit public-facing application, external remote access hardware, additions, phishing, all that kind of stuff. And then once they're in, what do they kind of do, right? Once they're in, lateral movements, impact, right? Disk wipe, defacement, data manipulation, etc. All this starts to come into play, and they created this kind of matrix. And so if you watch certain attacks, you can actually kind of follow along. So here's a perfect example. Somebody first gains access by through a brute force attack. Brute force, hey, I'm just going to keep pounding at that web UI, username and password until I find a combination that works. Well, if you don't have that application protected and they're eventually able to get in, okay, so now they're in. So what they do, obviously they look around, maybe they get access to, maybe they're looking at somebody's, documentations, and somebody happens to have firewall rules, or really the admin to one of the firewalls, username and password. Unfortunately, I see this a lot. People have an Excel spreadsheet. Hey, here's username and password of, somebody's laughing in the background, right? I hit a funny bone, but it's true, right? People do this all the time. They will share that document. Hey, new admin guy. Okay, here's the username and password so you can log into the firewall. Well, somebody on the outside finds that because now they're impersonating somebody. Great, now I have access to it. Guess what? If I know your firewall, I know how to get in. Let me change something to benefit me, i.e. the attacker. That gives them the ability then, hey, let me upload some malware, because now that firewall is not going to do what it needs to do because it's been compromised. It's not necessarily compromised, as it's someone basically created a rule to allow the malware to go, and now the malware's going. And now, here you go, lateral movement, find where the data is, great, I got your data. Pretty straightforward. And again, when you start to take a look at this kind of all starts to map out. That's how the attacker did it, right? And this is actually, again, they actually, provide this to the public to give the public information. Have you anybody heard of OWASP, for example? So, organization that kind of tracks all the vulnerabilities from a web application perspective. They put out a list. Hey, what are the, this year, what was the top 10 latest attacks? Same kind of concept here, but obviously taken to really more about talking about how these attacks are done instead of really concentrating it from an application or web application perspective. Same kind of concept. So bottom line is you got to protect yourself, right? And of course, this is where, again, we talk about cybersecurity insurance. Cybersecurity insurance is going to ask you to do the same exact thing. So let's talk about those points, right? First thing, we should, disable macros. If you don't need it, why allow it, right? Because half of the malware that we see today's have to do with some sort of macro. You don't need it in your environment, get rid of it. This is actually, I think, probably one of the things that probably isn't done enough. This concept of network segmentation. Why? Well, does it make sense? And let's go back to the last guy who did the presentation on Rubrik, right? You want to create it so that you have this concept of air gap, immutable data, so to speak. Well, that kind of falls in line with this concept of network segmentation. Does it make sense if you're doing a backup? Don't really care what your backup solution is, but if your backup is being stored on the same subnet as where your users are, does that make sense? No, no, it doesn't. Right? Why would your users be able to access where your backups are? So you really have to take this to heart, because this is actually one of the key ways to help prevent malware from spreading out the network, right? I would say the attacker's lowest hanging fruit are your users, unfortunately. So if your users are your users, educated or not educated, they're potentially probably the ones that you have to worry about the most. But does it make sense that, hey, there's certain applications they need to get access to, but does it make sense to have that server on the same subnet as where all the user traffic is? No. That's why you create segmentation, right? Pinhole what the users need to get access to and leave it at that, nothing else. Why would I open up SMB if all they need to do is actually have 80 or 443 access? Why would I allow SMB traffic? Because that's, again, where a piece of malware could easily exploit, use. Now you have a different problem, right? Your data could be locked up. Remove unused or unauthorized applications. Well, yeah, right? And also, again, you kind of want to lock this down as much as possible, where it kind of goes to, we talk about, well, who has access to what? Well, if your users are, again, the weakest link, what are you guys doing? Multi-factor authentication? How many people are not using multi-factor authentication? Thank you if you guys are, because it looks like you are. I think this is also probably one of the weakest links, I think, in a lot of people's network. Being able to create, better applications, but really securing them as well. One of the larger breaks, what was it? Financial group, was it Experian or something to that effect?
Capital One.
No, it wasn't Capital One. It was like Experian. They got breached because they didn't update their servers, right? And an attacker took advantage of that exploit and was able to get into the application and, breach, get access to all that data and potentially breach it to the web. This is probably, unfortunately, the weakest link for a lot of people in their network, because they just assume that, oh, my firewall's doing it. Well, no, your firewall's not doing it, because if you understand what your firewall's doing, you've actually opened up access to that backend server, 44380. What you really want to do is you want to take a look at the behavior of what's being requested from that outside entity, whether it's human or, worst case scenario, bot. You could create restrictions from a GUIP perspective, but Google goes around and tries to find what's happening on your web page, because they want to help you with your searches so that your page shows up as a search. But attackers are using the same kind of bots to say, what's on this page? Is there a form? Is there a username and password? Ooh, what's behind the username and password? How much level of protection is there? Nothing? Brute force attack. If you have nothing to protect it because your firewall's not going to do it, this is a big hole. Reinforce access controls on backups. Again, doesn't make sense to allow anyone on your network other than your administrators to be able to access that data set. Should only be them, nobody else. We talked about this, right? This is probably one of the biggest threat vectors. So you got to take a look at your email security, right? Implement execution prevention of disabling macro scripts, right? Enable strong filtering prevention, right? So this concept of not only at the gateway, but even from an AI machine learning perspective, right? That is where the cutting edge stuff is happening. And of course, Barracuda has something to help you out, so we can definitely talk about that. But that's kind of a little beside the point. Executable files. Obviously, you want to filter those out. Implementing a user training program, because again, unfortunately, our weakest link are our users. So how do you make your users better? Well, you train them. You do a simulation, you see the results, you give them training, and you repeat. And you do this over and over again, because unfortunately, there are different threat vectors and how these emails show up from a phishing perspective. Could be a UPS, hey, your delivery was missed because you're missing information. Or, are you going to maybe hit somebody in finance? Hey, your bank account's being closed or being, suspended because of X, Y, and Z. Please authenticate. Really? You got to train your users to look at what they look at when those emails come through. Did it come from those sources? Is it actually coming from Wells Fargo? Literally, does it say Wells Fargo or does it say WEII Fargo, right? Something to that effect, right? Misspelling. But close enough that if someone doesn't look closely enough, they miss it, and then they click, and now you have a different story, right? You have an account takeover situation. Encourage users to question. This actually was very ironic. I have a customer right now that's actually on a trial of our solution sets because he ran into an issue where one of his customers or one of his internal users clicked on an email that they thought was legitimate, and basically asked them to, hey, in order to see this encrypted message, please provide your credentials. So the user did it. Then, once those credentials were captured, the attacker decided to hit her mailbox, found a distribution list, and then hit everybody in the company. And what he had to do was he basically had to send out an email. If you clicked on this, let me know. You know how far he got? He didn't. Because he realized that although one person confessed, 5 other people did not. And he still had this problem of people are still in my accounts. They're creating this havoc. What am I to do? So he thought he cleaned it up. He says, oh, I'll shut down that account, reset the password. No, he had 5 other people that compromised, and then more internal emails came out of that. And then once he got a hold of those, he had to do all this backtracking. For 2 days, he was pulling his hair out. And I said, dude, hey, we talked about this. Run the trial. Go. 2 days later, he's like, okay, I think I have everything under control. One of his biggest things that he really didn't do that we said you should do, multi-factor authentication. That's why the attacker got in there so easy, because once they gave it the username and password, they wreaked havoc. And literally, it took them another 2 days of our monitoring, watching suspicious emails being generated, till he finally got it to the point in time where, okay. Because he couldn't tell everybody, okay, y'all need to reset your password. Fortunately, it didn't work. Right? He was asking people, please tell me who responded to this email because we need to reset your password. And unfortunately, like I said, out of the 6 people that he found out did do it, only 1 confessed, and the other 5, I don't know how they got my credentials. Yeah. Really, we need to create a better environment and even policies so that if something does happen, you can have a response to it rather quickly so you can help mitigate, again, days, weeks, months, years of this type of issue. Going back to the network, robust network segmentation, right? So really it's kind of this concept of reduce the speed or even better yet, just eliminate the possibility of, right? Investigate any authorized software, particularly remote desktop, remote monitoring. This is always a fun one, but again, how much trust do you put in your users? Do your users have the ability to add on applications to their devices, right? Hopefully you're in a better controlled environment where you kind of dictate what your users can do versus what they can't do, but I know that's not necessarily the norm. But again, something you need to kind of look into if your users have the ability to add software to their own computers that they're using. Secure web applications. So this, again, I think is just not mentioned enough. We see this all the time because, again, your network firewall is not doing this. Your network firewall is blocking based on port and protocol, maybe IP address, but that's it. It's not looking at behaviors, right? It understands signatures. So that's as far as it goes. If it knows about an attack, yeah, it can prevent it, but that's it. So if it's a new bot that's coming in and hammering your application, your firewall is going to do nothing. This is where you need a web application firewall, because it's going to look at the behavior and, if needed, to block that type of access. Then, of course, regular audits. And then again, prior multi-factor authentication. That should be the norm. Unfortunately, it's not. Backup, right? Reinforce access control. Who has access to it? Backup all information, including data from SaaS applications. This is actually important, very much like the previous presenter from Rubrik. If you ever read Microsoft Service Agreement, it's actually under 6A. They are about the services. However, they are not about the data. So even if even if the service goes down, their responsibility is to get the service back up. But if your data gets corrupted in any way, shape, or form, they are actually going to tell you to kick rocks because it's not their responsibility. It's you, as the customer, is your responsibility for that data. So if through that, whatever, your data gets corrupted, they're going to say, you have to fix that. That's your responsibility. We are about the services. You're about the data. And so backing up your information is going to be crucial. And yes, we do have a solution set that actually can back up to Office 365 and do your SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, very much like Rubrik, although I think our price point a little bit better and different from the concept of different buckets. It's all unlimited. So we do things a little bit differently. So could be a conversation piece, just say. Full backups and restore, you got to test this too, right? Backups only go so far, but if you have it backed up and then you try to put it back together and it doesn't work, then you got to really think about your backup solution set, right? So regular testing is actually important. General security advice, right? Patch everything, right? Could have prevented a very large breach a few years ago. Put crisis response team in place for any suspect of cyber threat. And of course, alert your users for the heightened risk. So again, if something does happen, you really need to let them know that they need to be on a better behavior rather than just maybe what they're regularly doing. Bottom line is, so what do you have for next steps? You really kind of need to answer yourself these questions, right? Do you have the resources in play to really be able to respond to a ransomware attack? And if the answer is no, that's okay. But let's take a look at your plan. What do you have as a plan? If you don't have a plan, create one, right? That's really the idea. And then the other concept is, hey, should you outsource? You're actually at a great location for that, right? KS can actually help you with this type of stuff as a vendor. So consider what they could help you with if this becomes an issue for you guys. Questions? Yeah.
So having a phishing test in organizations versus what do you do with training fatigue?
Training fatigue. So it's always kind of an interesting concept of training fatigue. It typically all has to do with the content that's available to you, right? So if you're looking to kind of have a third-party vendor kind of give, to create those simulations, create the training, you want to take a look at how in depth those are, right? What kind of potential videos, gamified content, for example. Videos only go so far. People kind of get turned off after a while. I get it. Gamified content is actually really interesting because, again, it makes it a little more interactive for the user. And while they're learning about cybersecurity, they get to play a little bit of the game. So sometimes you have to take a look at what the content's available. And also just realize not everything's done in English. So Barracuda does have a security awareness training solution set that does offer gamified content as well as the training videos, and not just on just the concept of phishing, but really kind of dives into the whole cybersecurity aspects. Even content on GDPR, PCI DDS, for example, are covered as topics. Last October, we created a 4-week module so that your users can actually, be more involved in that concept of cybersecurity. Because again, your weakest links, fortunately, are your users. To answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Anybody else?
Question. So earlier you mentioned, somebody may attack your family members and then attack you. I mean,
Yep.
work from home is still there.
Yep.
What do we need to do? I mean, do we need to secure, employees' home network as well?
I mean, it's hard, but this is where I think it goes back to the concept of security awareness of training, right? People really need to, I understand where it's like people get this concept of training fatigue. I mean, I work with a school district where they're like, it's hard for us to implement the solution set because, the union is pushing back on the level of training. And I'm like, this really shouldn't be about training the teachers on cybersecurity. This is just everybody learning that cybersecurity is just a general topic we just need to be better at, period, right? Because unfortunately, it exists. And again, the way I look at it is I'm a target. It's just a matter of time. It's just how do they get to me? And like I said, it could be through my kids, it could be through my coworker, could be through my my family members. My mother-in-law, love her to death, but yeah, I get emails almost every other week. Is this real? And I'm like, well, did you look at this? Did you look at that? It says AOL, but did you realize when you take a look at the email address that it's not an AOL address? Do you do business with this company XYZ, .ru? Do you know that RU stands for Russia? Yeah, no, this is an attack, right? She's getting better, right? She's actually gotten hit with, she'll get the phishing attacks, right, on her text. It's like, oh my God, what is this? And she's like screenshotting it and she's sending it to me and my wife. My wife's her daughter, and so she's like, is this real? And we're going like, nope. Because it's like, these organizations don't operate that way. Why are you getting this text? Stop and think about it for a second. Do you do business with this company? No? Yeah, scam, delete it, move on.
So you recommend just training maybe the kids more? Is that?
It's a general topic. This shouldn't be just a business topic. This shouldn't be just a, it should be an everyone topic as far as I'm concerned, because the better we're educated, the better we are. I'll give you a perfect example. DMARC, SPF, DKIM. Anybody know what they stand for, what they are for, what they're related to? Okay, no, it's email, right? I swear, if everyone who had a domain and a mail server stood up the appropriate SPF record, utilized DKIM whenever possible, and had an enforcement policy in DMARC, guess what? Impersonators would have a hard time, period. Because we can authenticate all those emails, and we can say, oh, it's not coming from the source that I expected to, reject. The problem is not everyone's done it. Homeland Security actually identified this as a cool tool to use and literally created an edict back in October of 2018 to say, you guys need, all government agencies, use this tool. Understand how it works. Hopefully by 2019 of October, you'll have an enforcement policy. Guess what the adoption rate was? Probably say less than 20%. But for our customers that actually have our impersonation protection or domain fraud protection, they realize how powerful this is, because now, not only do they have a way of making sure that their email gets through, because all their email that they send out can be authenticated from a sender authentication perspective, because it's coming from a right IP address from an SPF perspective. It's either DKIM signed, so this concept of a wax seal envelope, if that email was actually tampered with, that changes the DKIM signature. Therefore, the public and private key won't match up. So people have a way of guaranteeing that their email can actually be authenticated. And of course, if the email can't be authenticated, they have a policy that says either quarantine or reject it. I swear, if every organization in the world did that, attackers would have a hard time using impersonated emails. It's that simple. We don't. From a collective, all of us, we failed. So now we got to go back and we got to fix this. It's not too hard to do. You just have to do the monitoring of it, and you can get it done. Cool. Any other questions? All right. So I think I'm the reason why I'm holding up lunch. So
Just the keynote in the main.
You've still got like 50 minutes until lunch.
so I'm just holding up the keynote. So there you go.
No, not.
How you doing, Ryan?
How are you?
I'm great.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a long time. Well, I have seen you since.
Thanks.
Almost standing room only at the keynote.
Since last year, so.
Thank you very much.
How's it going?
It's always fun.
It's good. Very good. Everything's running along.
Yeah. You guys are just you just don't need me anymore.
Well, I want to set up some, being able to send emails from our devices and stuff.
Oh,
Still
okay.
having issues with that, so I brought up the old